Hi, everybody. Hi, this is Mihai Algiu from Circle of Being, Somatic Shadow Work, Somatic Psychotherapist Associate. This is my friend, teacher, and mentor, Scott Killaby, founder of Killaby Inquiries, Living Inquiries, author, spiritual teacher, developer of a wonderful cutting-edge model for recovery from addiction. So welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Mihai.
Yeah, this is our, we call it like the second season. We had already like 20 such dialogues and we took a little break. And meanwhile, I got more deeper into the work you are teaching and more experienced with this. So I feel like we can resume. I'm at a more, let's say, more familiarized with what you are talking about, first-hand experience with myself and in clinical practice. And so I'm excited to talk about these things again. And for new people, you know, the banner of these talks are psychotherapy and non-duality, combining psychotherapeutical processes, somatic processes, trauma, addiction, repression, with spiritual teachings, enlightenment teachings, non-duality teachings, as well as science now, where there's more and more science connected to body mind as being connected, and a lot of physical ailments and chronic pain and unusual diagnoses are maybe science discovering is very well connected to emotional issues and repression. So we are exploring at this dimension. So Scott, I noticed lately that you are seeing awareness practices, different techniques and exercises that various traditions offered, or methods that you developed. They have different functions and they can bring awareness to, they are not all the same, basically. Like with some techniques, you can witness some, let's say, a top layer of the ocean, the waves on top and the boats on top, and maybe a little fish coming out. And then that's great, as opposed to being blindfolded on the ocean, right? Now you can see something. Then there's a deeper dimension. You're talking about going a little bit underwater and seeing some medium level waves and creatures that live there that may seem scary. And then, however, the previous method somehow can go up to at some level where you can see, but you can't see beyond that level. And then you go to the next level, the second dimension that you are talking about. You can see more. And although the second dimension, you can see more deeper, you are like, I don't know, 100 feet or whatever, 100 yards underwater. And now there is a whole other dimension necessary to see, like, really the bottom of the ocean, with all kind of creatures that never come to the light unless we are very triggered or something happens. So anyway, using this metaphor of the ocean, yeah, I would like to invite you to talk about this. So these three dimensions of what we can see using awareness practices. It's almost like low-hanging fruit, a little higher hanging fruit, and then some that are very hard to reach. And yeah, so there's a topic for today. Also, I would like to, read this to start us off. This is from Lester Levinson. He was the teacher of one of my teachers, and he, long time ago, like 40 years ago, somehow seemed to have been on a similar page to what we are doing now. He was combining, awakening with the understanding that we have so much subconscious, unconscious repressed material, painful stuff that is there, and he, out of his own suffering and physical pain, realized the necessity of releasing those. So created a method to release, loosening up the subconscious. So from Lester Levinson, that I sometimes read in my groups, just the back of the book. So he says this, let me know what you think about that. You can have, be, and do whatever you will or desire. The only thing stopping you is the accumulation of negative thoughts and feelings which you are subconsciously holding. Remove these, and you remove the blocks to your accomplishing whatever you wish in life. Remove these, and you will find love, happiness, and joy beyond your wildest dreams. Remove these, and you are free.
Well, it makes me smile.
Yeah.
But because I can resonate with it. But what were you going to ask a question or have a conversation about?
Well,
it?
I usually read this in groups, and I'm like, yeah. But then what I don't say is like, well, this is hard work. You can't just meditate a little bit or see something or observe some pattern. This is to get to the accumulation of negative thoughts and feelings, which we are subconsciously holding. They might not be easy to reach with what you call the first dimension. So anyway, whatever you want to do with this quote, besides that it made you smile because it's true.
Yeah. Well, let me go over my dimensions first, because I like the water metaphor. I like that. I knew where you were going to go, like to the bottom feeders and the sharks eventually, the deeper. I thought that's where it was. But if I talk about it this way, let me disclaim it first, because whenever you start talking about dimensions, it can get people in their minds too much. But I feel like these dimensions are coming from my own experience. Like I'm looking back and saying, well, 10 years ago, I never would have been able to access the material that I can access now, period. I just couldn't. So where was I? Well, I mean, you could say in a non-dual sense, there's nobody nowhere, but relatively, where was I in my practice and my realization that I couldn't see these things? And so that was just what I call the first dimension, which is a lot of the, not all of them, but a lot of the non-dual teachings, meditation, mindfulness is just like that. The ocean, the waves are coming and going. The practices and the pointers are about seeing and allowing the waves, but we're not going below the surface very much because we're not prompting anything up. And if I would have had dialogue with myself 10 years ago, I think myself 10 years ago would have been confused and maybe even triggered somewhat by what I'm sharing now. And I can understand it that way. I didn't have the consciousness to really understand what I'm talking about back then. I didn't have it. So one of the reasons that I mention these dimensions is for purposes of communication, because if you're in that first dimension, you don't have the practices and the pointers to see the deeper dimensions yet. And so we're almost like having, in a sense, different conversations in those different dimensions. And before I say that, it's not an ego thing. So if I share about this, somebody might say, well, don't you think you know something? And people have said that. It doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like I've gained knowledge. It feels like there's been insight that's been revealed and transformation through these dimensions. And so I know it might come off as like a trigger for somebody when they think of, oh, I'm in the first dimension and you're talking about third dimension. Aren't you special? But it's really, I'm trying to be helpful to people to just say, could it be that your current practice and realization just doesn't show you some things? Is that possible first? And if we can be open to the idea that it's possible, then you might start moving beyond that first dimension where you're just being with what is and discovering, either because you become trauma informed or because you have illness or something, you have to go deeper with it, right? And this is what I'm calling second dimension, is where we're not just being with the waves as the ocean. And the realization isn't just about seeing that I'm the ocean and the waves. That's still first dimension, frankly, for me. The second dimension is there are some waves or there's some things that you can't see that are right under the surface, as you said. So I actually,
sorry, before we go to a second dimension, can we stay with the first one?
Yep.
Because for some people this is new, and definitely we are not talking about this 4th dimension, 5th dimension, 6th dimension. So we are not talking about that.
No.
So, okay, I wake up here, have an interview with you. I get an email from somebody who is upset with me. This happened, yeah, just now. And then I am sitting, I've done a little, let's say, just Zen style meditation, just 10 minutes. I wish I had more time. So I go, let's say, watching my breath, watching some thought, the thought are quieting down. I feel some pressure in my belly. I let it be there, not try to change it. Gradually, it diminishes, the thing in my belly. Not quite all the way down, it's still here now. I'm hearing sounds. I even have a thought like, I hope I don't get into trouble. Okay, this guy's upset. Okay, oh, it'd be nice to see Scott. Have a long day today. A little something in my chest, maybe some fear. Oh, I stay some more. If I stayed more, I know that will be like, okay, I'm good. So I've been present, witnessing what came and left. It came and left. Maybe the thing in the belly didn't leave. But so this is 1st dimension, yeah?
Yeah. Good way of saying.
Witnessing some level, some things, witnessing, not identifying with them. It brings some loosening up. I'm like, okay, there's something going on, but let's not go there. Let's like stay with, I'm committed, loyal to Buddha nature. I'm resting as the aware presence. Yeah, so that's 1st dimension. Yeah, this is also like, I mean, I love Eckhart Tolle, yeah? Don't get me wrong, but like this, I'm walking in the park, instead of thinking about all kind of past and future issues, I'm coming back, I'm looking at the birds, my breath, the colors. Maybe I have some gratitude and a little bit fear, but I don't know why I have the fear. So yeah, so this is 1st dimension, which by itself, if one were to be committed to the 1st dimension of witnessing, this is already, I'm trying to get people come to me to be committed to a 1st dimension of witnessing, right?
Right.
But then it has limitations, right? Yeah.
Yes, it has limitations. And the limitations are, if there's unconscious material that doesn't arise freely as a wave, that's not being seen. And so we know, though, that the unconscious does control our responses and reactions to life, in a big way. So let me just talk about my own experiences. In being in 1st dimension, I was pulled into the 2nd dimension because it wasn't just, there was at first there were, my first introduction to it was what I call the deficiency story. This is just my experience. It might be different for others. What I noticed in that 1st dimension, where you're just being with what is and things arise, is that when I would get triggered in relationship, I would feel the response, like woundedness or something, the trigger, but I didn't see the waves really connected to it. On the deficiency story, which is a really core identity. It's like, so when you're in the 1st dimension, this is something that may or may not rise in its entirety, right? You might feel the trigger, the reaction, and even from the trauma research, they might say, well, yeah, that's a trauma response. That deficiency story comes in part from trauma. You see yourself that way as a child, and you still do to some level, but it's unconscious. And so in the moment being triggered on the deficiency story, you just might not see. You might not even see the thought, I am unlovable, like a deficiency story, I'm not good enough. You might feel it, and then you might actually be blind to it, that identity in yourself, and then you start pointing outward at the other person, like, you did this, you did that, it's your fault. It's just hiding it from ourselves. So in that 1st dimension, I couldn't get to that deficiency story. And that was my first thing. I kept seeing, it wasn't a lot of triggers, but just every now and then my ex would do something, and that, what I know now to be that deficiency story, would come to the surface, but it wouldn't come to the surface enough to be seen. So I started to develop that boomerang, right? So we can name it. So I put my spouse out there, and I ask, in the midst of that trigger, what am I believing about who I am, or what's the deficiency story here? And then by asking that question, that's inquiry. It's not just be with what is, it's asking a question. Then it would come to the surface. I'm unlovable. And so that second dimension work was very helpful to see that layer, because I worked with that for a while. And then after a while, that unlovable story stopped arising in that dimension. And it was a deeper freedom that I could not have experienced in that first dimension, because that was so hidden, but it was still not as hidden as the deeper repression and trauma root programming in that third dimension, which we'll get to. So I became a fan of any sort of inquiry or process that would prompt some things up instead of just be first dimension, whatever arises. I became interested in Byron Katie's work because I knew she was prompting things up, and that's helpful. And certain forms of inquiry that were prompting things up, there are other examples of it. The living inquiries that we created would prompt that first sort of level up of stuff, but we found limitations there too. So the limitation of the first dimension is, I think you've already made it obvious. If something isn't arising naturally to awareness, it's still going to be unconscious. And in that first dimension, you're not going to be able to make that conscious quite often. I don't want to make a rule about it, but generally in that first dimension, because this is unconscious material, you're not likely to see the layers of that stuff in second dimension very well. So there's the limitation of the first, and then there's limitation of the second, which we can talk about.
Let's stay with it here a little bit with the second one. Even one of my teachers will use this method. It was non-dual, and talking about deeper dimensions, but at the same time not encouraging people to go there. So some kind of mixed messages, but they were saying, like, you're walking on next to a lake and you see some algae, some algae sticking out, and you're like, that's interesting. But there is more algae that is not sticking out. So which is this idea of sense of lack, sense of unease, sense of unpleasantness. So it's like, hey, since it's here, can we first of all not resist it, not run away from it, not escape it, but maybe pull some more out, let it come out more. But we need to pull it. It's not going to come out by itself and say, hey, look at me. So it seems like this requires some prompting. In somatic psychotherapy, they talk about in Hakomi, like, first of all, get the client into a more mindful state, meet their emotions, meet their thoughts, and then try to access their core material, go a little deeper. Accessing, they will call it accessing. And this needs not just witnessing or seeing what's on top, but like little tricks, like say a mining question, right? So can you mentioned the boomerang, and for those who are not familiar with this, I recommend a very cool thing. Whenever we are triggered, even science talks that they're like one part present, something in the present is triggering, but the fact that it's so triggering is that there's a past associated with it. There's some hidden algae there. And this boomerang, okay, well, I'm triggered now, I feel this, but what old story of mine is evoked by this? Oh, I'm going to be in trouble, I'm not safe or something. So I identify more like the real cause of the trigger. And some of the KI, some of the killer bee inquiries are meant early on to like mining, or what tools and techniques we have for going to the second dimension.
Reverse inquiry, utility inquiry, and mining are the three that come to mind for that second dimension in KI. So when Dan and I first developed those tools, what we were recognizing is that those tools were pulling up layers of that unconsciousness that we couldn't have otherwise seen in that first dimension. So reverse inquiry would be the simplest version that we give is if you believe you're not good enough and you say the opposite. So if you say, while you're looking at a trigger or someone who's triggered that, I'm perfect as I am, not as a positive affirmation, but as a just throwing something in to see what like in a pond, as you said, throwing the pebble in the pond, seeing what ripples come from that. out of the unconscious. And we started to notice that, okay, by doing that, now we're seeing part of the network of that thoughts that we couldn't see. There's just layers that come up. So if I say I'm perfect as I am, it might come up like no. And then it starts to prove it to you through it showing you the past. It'll show you like programs that you believe that are connected to it, words. It might show you memories that seem to confirm it, feelings. But now it's all being brought into awareness by that reverse inquiry rather than being hidden like it might be in that first dimension. Those layers might be hidden. And so there's one, we saw that this is a different thing. We're prompting something up that wouldn't otherwise arise. And then utility inquiry, which is as something is coming up, like you believe, okay, I believe I'm not good enough. Another inquiry that would prompt something up that wouldn't otherwise arise would be, what am I getting out of believing that? What's the payoff? And you have to ask it really into the body, so to speak, because it's old programming. But what might come up is, oh, I have to believe this to stay safe, or to get love, or to control my life, or whatever. That's another layer that we notice coming up that wouldn't otherwise arise. That was a big development there to see that. And then the mining, as you said, where you sit with a sensation or an emotion and you ask, like, what does this mean about me? And then here comes some layers or some thoughts that wouldn't otherwise arise. That was a real breakthrough, for sure. Like to be able to have all those tools that gave us access to that.
Yeah.
To, that's not a real dimension. It's just, it's just aspect of experience that we didn't have awareness.
This I guess are dimensions of seeing more of our unconsciousness.
Yeah.
With the first dimension, we see a little bit. The second dimension, we see more of it.
Yeah.
It usually reveal itself by itself. We need to prompt it. Like in my case now, I mean, like rather than ever, okay, something in my belly and a little, if I went to a belly and mine it, it's like, it's fear, basically. It's fear and maybe some guilt, fear and guilt. And then it says, I'm afraid. And then it says, oh, I might get into trouble. I didn't see this so much, the first layer of just seeing what is. And there is some, and if I open this, and there might be memories, because in my childhood, often I would be afraid of getting into trouble. And there was a state of fear and managing not being in trouble. And then I needed to hide and lie to, and then in that file, there is my father shouting, or my coach being upset with me or something. And that's why there is this, right? So.
Well, we also should talk about horizontal versus vertical, because that's really one of the reasons I talk about the 3 dimensions. It just, if you just, for those listening, just hear this, because you may not have ever thought of it this way. At the first dimension, it's really all horizontal, usually, because they're not digging at that, usually not digging there. So horizontal just means those are the waves. They're just going like this. Like, here's a thought. Yeah. Like you just mentioned, those thoughts or programs, one comes up with energy on it, and then it goes down. Awareness is here. Another one comes up. But it's horizontal in the sense that you're not, even when you started to do this with the roots, I was like, you're getting into vertical there. Like, so, right. So
you can go into vertical, but then you stop, and then something else pops up horizontally somewhere else. You pull somewhere there. Yeah. So you're pulling a little bit all over the place, but even with second dimension.
Yes, it's more skillful, but it doesn't get into the third dimension, which is vertical, which we'll explain in a second. But in the second dimension, so I was working with people for many years, even with LI, which was second dimension. And I kept seeing that certain programs would come up horizontally where there needed to be some sort of exploration on that, because there was more energy and obviously probably more programming with it, but we didn't have the skill. All that we could do that was repeat the inquiry on that particular thing. So we might land on, again, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And by repeating it, we start to get into some of the roots of it, the deeper roots of it. You just repeat it and more comes up and more comes up. And eventually, as you bring it all up, it can, if unless there are really deep somatic roots, it can stop appearing at a certain time because you're really making it conscious. But a lot of that second dimension is still horizontal in the sense as you're pulling things up and here come the waves, one after the other. And so you, unless you just repeat the inquiry on one of those waves, you're going to be missing. I saw people missing things and I didn't know how to take them into that deeper third dimension. So then through my chronic pain is where the third dimension came. So I was in that second dimension practice and there was no healing of the pain. I could go into some of the deeper trauma a little bit and a little bit of the repression, but I couldn't bring it up in the form that it was really in the deeper level, like it was a continuous trauma response, deeply connected in, you know, the roots in the body. So as I was just so horizontal, just didn't work that well for because this repression or the trauma is going to be something that will barely even arise, first of all, at all in first dimension. You know, a lot of people are not making contact with that stuff in first dimension. They're just sort of like, maybe it rears its head, a little bit of it horizontally. And then we, like you say, come back to awareness. We're regulated, don't have to deal with that sleeping dog. We don't know how to deal with it. So then as we start to do second dimension, we start to see more of the, at least some of more of the effects of the trauma and repression. Like we start to get into that deficiency story, which is often connected to it. We might also notice with the skills at level 2 in KI that we can prompt up. If I were to say at that second dimension, I can feel and express anger as a reverse inquiry. I can feel and express anger to them. We might see that, no, you can't. But it just doesn't want to show us much after that. And sometimes people don't even get the no, they just get a body response. So we understood that horizontal, or I did, is not going to get to the deeper roots where the pain is being, the signals being, you know, created or whatever from that trauma repression. So I just kept seeing that limitation, even with our own tools in second dimension. And the most that I would do is just repeat at first. Like if I saw that no come up, I would witness that no and the energy with it. And then I would repeat it again. Like I can feel and express anger. And it would start to go down that vertical road, but not really deep enough, you know, like, so during the pain, I just started to be able to bring it up more and more and more, like staying on a particular program that has deep roots, not horizontal, not going to all this, but right here, stay with this. I can't express anger and repeat the inquiry. Well, there's a limitation to that because you can do that, but it takes longer. And if you start to see what's happening there is, this isn't just a story, you know, it's not. So at first dimension, we might see stories, like, I think of it as like just these stories that come and go, as if when they go, they're gone. At second and third dimension, you know that they're not really gone. You know that they have deep roots. And so for me, I had to learn how to become more vertical again. So that's more about pulling that up right there like that. And so then we started to develop what we call the third dimension practice, which is when we encounter that no, or whatever it is, we want to translate that and find out what is the mind really saying there. And we find that's where we find our trauma responses or commands like, I have to hold back anger. I can't. So the no is saying something. It's not just no, it's intelligent. And so we learned how, and as you know, we've learned how to now make that command or response much more conscious in third dimension by not just witnessing horizontally, but by bringing it up in a vertical way. Like we're staying right here. I have to hold back. 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 Almost in a way that the mind is now mimicking the response in the body. The body's saying I have to hold back in a continuous way. Now the mind is being brought online in that way, in a continuous way. And somehow that's reaching down and deeper into the roots of the somatic. And that's how eventually the pain was healed. But my pain was healed. A lot of it was like in second dimension, moving into third dimension, you know, because I didn't have the skill yet. Now, after this healing has happened, I'm working with other people. We've honed that skill much more to be able to go into the deeper roots vertically. And you have to experience it. That's just a conceptual, but at least points to what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, this is for people who are maybe already attracted to this and they have some experience with it. I think most likely this gives more, you know, in the fourth way, they were saying that it's important to understand why we are doing what we are doing. The more you understand intellectually why we are doing this, there's more benefit in one's effort, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me say real quick. At first, you mentioned the intellect can go offline, because if you're just pointing to what is, sometimes the point is saying, you know, the intellect is just more of the waves, just let that come and go and just be in being. But you really do have, there's an intellect even involved at first dimension. There's a context. We're talking intellectually about what we're doing, but you really do have to bring that intellect online in second and third dimension to really more understand what we're doing there. If you just sort of dismiss the intellect, you know, you're not going to be able to use it to see and understand what we're doing. And I think that has to come back online, that discernment.
Yeah. Yes, they sometimes in some of these teachings, they minimized or they poo-poo the mind. This is just mind. It's just mind. But actually there is this like a higher mind, or, you know, our consciousness, the self is deeply intelligent. So we are using that higher intelligence to deprogram our intelligence from what's not true, you know. Hey, let's take here a little bit with we're going to the third dimension, but I know for some people this is fast.
Yeah, slow it down.
So, you know, I remember I was studying Hakomi, and they had this thing like, okay, so stay present and one thought at a time. And there's this thing here, bring attention there and see if there's any thought or memory about this. Yeah, this is already, we are mining, we are going into a second dimension. Something will come up and they will say, okay, well, there's this thought. And see if there's any other thought or memory or feeling about this, and see what happens next. Let's see what happens next. So, which is nice, like waiting for the unfolding of some subtle prompting. Okay, but then the limitation with that is that something will come next, going away from this thing, which is core. It's going now somewhere else, from unworthiness to safety, to betrayal, to sabotage, to what's wrong with me. And it's like, oh, wow, that was deep. We went there. Wow, there's a lot of stuff. Okay. So, but in order to be more free from this, hey, no, we're using reverse inquiry to stay okay with just the safety piece. I've been safe. I'm always safe. No, images, memories of not being safe, not this, not that. The mind wants to go somewhere else. We bring it, not like, let's see what happens next, but okay, can we go back to not safe, what's still left in the body? So staying, I guess, repetitiously and focused on a segment of the ocean or territory where there is pain body. Yeah, so we want to be more thorough, and staying with it, with the awareness, is like a sucking or cleaning that area, and rather than do it in a superficial way here and there, which I guess we do it at the beginning like that. It's good, a little bit here and there, but then let's stay here. Yeah, so that's the second dimension. But now about third dimension is like, also, seems like what is the ongoing signal of information in our nervous system that was developed in childhood in order to adapt to an environment, like ongoing signal, almost like silent voice that you can make conscious, that it says, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. It constantly say it. Actually, this what you call trauma, you call commands, would be what clinically we would call trauma response. So the trauma response, but this is a little abstract. In our actual experience, that trauma response for me says, hide, be careful, pay attention, hide, lie, don't speak, don't feel, hold back. So this is what we are talking about, and these are deeply powerful. They have a lot of shares in the system, basically, a lot of shares in a company. They have a lot of decisions. They are, I guess in Hakomi, they call this core organizer. Our experience happens based on this core protocol, right? So those, if you can talk a little bit about that, this what's at the third dimension first, what's in there before what to do with it.
Well, I think that's the great spiritual bypass on the, when I'm talking to second and third dimension, it's innocent. But if you're staying in, first of all, staying in first dimension, you're not going to see a lot of this, is what I'm saying. You might see glimpses of it, but, and the glimpses that you're seeing are like the products of that core programming quite often. Like, oh, here's a deficiency story, I'm not good enough. But, or if that even arises, not knowing that it might be connected directly to the trauma imprints and to the repression, but you can't see it. So there's a bypassing that can happen in that. It's very innocent and happened for me. Not understanding all this, again, understanding, I needed to be trauma informed and understand how repression worked first so that I can move out of those dimensions. But it's definitely this core programming. And, you know, when, I don't know if Carl Jung actually said this, but he said it, you know, until you make the unconscious conscious, it's going to control your life, and you'll call it fate or something.
Yeah.
That is real truth to me. Because at that level, that core programming, it's behind everything. It's behind a lot of the suffering. And sometimes we're just dealing with the surface of it, though, in the first, and even in the second dimension, still the surface. So in the third dimension, we get down to the root programming, which is just like you said, very skillfully or articulately. It's just like that. It's simple childlike commands to survive. And that, you have to understand that that's not really arising in first and second dimension. So before you dismiss the work, hear that, you know, like if you're going to dismiss, you're going to hear that first, because if there's any truth to it at all, you want to pay attention to that, right? Because it's there operating, whether you agree or not. If the trauma research is right, and if we're right about our direct experience here, which we think we can trust, there's something here to be explored. But it's scary for people, and that keeps them out of that second, third dimension. It's deeply unconscious. So people would even believe that it's not happening if they can't see it in first dimension. It's not real. It's not there. Or even if it is there, it's all illusion, just waves. Don't bother. So there's the bypassing, you know. And so that's actually, now the problem with that is that it has real effects in people's lives when you're pointing away from that, because we now know that trauma and repression and shame are behind a lot of the real issues that we have, as you said, like disease, chronic pain. So to be pulling people away from that is, you use the word dangerous, so I would use that too, because it can lead people into a place where they're blinded to this third dimension stuff, or this trauma and repression. And if that's the stuff that's creating the disease and a lot of the mental health and physical health issues, that is a bypass.
Yeah.
Right. So the core programming to me is key to the embodiment of this and to the real depthful transformation that can happen. And it's not just about being healthy and not having pain. This third dimension affects all of our relationships, all responses and reactions to relationship. Is directly affecting addiction. For a lot of people, I think it's running the seeking, because at least on some level, it's really running the thing. We're trying to run away from this deep core stuff and, you know, into awareness, all the ways are appearing to me. You know, this is something we really need to pay attention to. You know, I don't think we can afford to really, we're becoming so more aware of this stuff now, like just on social media, trauma and Carl Jung and all this stuff. And we're starting to become aware of it. Now we're pulling it together, you know, and we're not even thinking of it as two different things now. It's all awareness based. So the ocean is there in all the dimensions, you could say. It's not a different ocean. It's the same ocean of awareness, if that's your context, awareness based, but it just goes deeper within the unconscious in each dimension. These are really dimensions of skill, practice. They're not trying to explain reality so much. They're showing you where you might be, and you think that you can see everything, but without skill, you can't. And so what you can't see, that's the unconscious. until you make that conscious, it'll run your life.
Yeah.
Right. And such a simple fact, if you can be aware of, then it opens you up to that dimension. You stop bypassing it at that point.
Yeah. Wow. So, you know, you mentioned this Jung and this the unconscious that remains unconscious creates fate. I was listening recently to Thomas Hubel, which is one of the modern day mystics, which is trauma informed and working with trauma and collective trauma and stuff like that. And he was saying this trauma is karma.
Yeah, right.
It's like unprocessed trauma is like keeps this happening, like so-called karma. And so what it dawned on me as I hear you now, it's like the creatures or the habitat of the bottom is more like at the reptilian brain level in some way. These are all impulses,
survival,
fast and charged, that we learned as we were really young to survive. Yeah, to survive, to have less pain, to get more safe. And they were developed by the, I guess, reptilian brain of a 4-year-old, 2-year-old, 6-year-old. And those programs to keep ourselves safe, they have a repressive quality to our own life force.
Yeah.
So that's where what they would call repression, is that in order to survive, or seemingly to survive and keep myself safe, I needed to keep myself smaller. For me, I don't know, like I have to feel my commands, which are common. I work with people that are so common. They are not so many, but definitely they are like, it's not safe to speak, don't share, hide, lie, be careful, don't feel,
be peaceful.
yeah, be peaceful, be good, be nice, be nice, be good. And so, but these are, you know, just for people who haven't discovered them yet, they are imperatives. It's not like, hey, you may want to be peaceful, my friend. No, like, be careful, watch out. Yeah. And they are, you know, we made them conscious to put these words in them, but there's like it's a seemingly non-verbal jolt. And then we discovered that it has there's some words in it. There's intelligence in that, and those created this repression of voice, repression of authenticity, repression of expression, repression of feeling, repression of action, repression of desire, of all of that. And the fruits of this, so first the survival strategies, which were helpful in childhood. There's repression, which was helpful in childhood. It becomes very unhelpful. It's not helpful, creates problems in adulthood. And then if that is not brought to light, this may very likely bring up, you know, unhappiness, dissatisfaction, and also chronic pain, and diagnosis, and cancer. And just because we are damning life force, basically.
Yeah. And also I wrote down, well, now you said damning the life force. This is a perfect segue into, I know that not all of your audience, and you remind me that not all of our audience is interested in non-duality, but a lot of them are, or meditation or mindfulness at least, right? That's a bigger audience there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that in the dimensions, because there's a sleepiness that happens in the dimensions with regard to the unconscious sometimes when you're doing those practices, because the practices are often designed in finding the stillness or the experience beyond mind, quiet mind, non-conceptual awareness, presence. It's the Eckhart Tolle on the park bench. You can imagine that he didn't have much thought, right? But the problem with that is it can be deceptive, because as you're resting with that, in some ways the practices, they're great, and I say do those practices. I'm not ever saying don't, but I'm saying supplement, because as you go quieter, this stuff hides in that quiet mind sort of mimics the unconscious mind, or it joins with the unconscious mind to further dam like our experience. That's exactly what I found with the chronic pain. Is the mind was very quiet consciously during the pain. So it's just like space or peace or vastness and pain right in the middle of it. And so it was deceptive, because with the quietness, it was like, there's nothing here. There is no mind-body connection. If there were, I would be able to see it. So that can be like, you can actually be led into that deeper, almost like reinforcing the dam up of experience through the quiet mind. So I've learned to show people how to supplement that quietness or those practices with prompting up the unconscious mind, reestablishing the mind, the old mind-body connection that was there as a child when you're responding to something. There's an intelligence, as you said. It's not just, you can actually discover, as we discover here, that there are commands there, responses that are happening. But the repression itself shuts it out. You know, the trauma itself is unconscious. So there's unconscious mind happening already. And then as you get into the teachings, the practices, they could be sort of solidifying that experience of quietness. And then that's deceptive, because the unconscious mind, like right behind that or below that, and it's not being accessed. So at the third dimension, we really have to access that, make it fully conscious. Otherwise, and even so much as like, I often say that like at that third dimension, at least in KI, silence doesn't work very well at all. You know, like just resting as quietness doesn't really work, because as you rest as the quietness, the response is still happening unconsciously. So even if you're doing that work and you try to bring a lot of quietness to it, like quiet mind, you can just be stuffing that mind down more. So there's almost an opposite practice that has to come to make it conscious, to don't keep doing that, because it's just going to bury it. And some people who've been in these practices for years find themselves somewhat unable to do the third dimension practice, because they've buried the mind so much. They've gone back to that still so often that when it comes time to bring up the unconscious mind, it's just been stuffed down so much that it takes them a while to reconnect that mind-body connection, to move that energy that's in the body. So that's another thing. Just want to point it out. It's not to say all those practices are bad. I'm not saying that. Just saying supplement it, because if you can see what's happening, you're not going to be able to reach that. At least with KI, you won't be able to reach that deeper unconsciousness if you just keep coming back to quietness, non-conceptual awareness, presence, which is very quiet and peaceful, but doesn't give you access to that.
Yeah. It's like in the martial arts, there are certain moves which are very useful, but then there are more advanced moves for more difficult, tricky situations. So all the moves are useful as a complete warrior. But yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that I got good at snuffing things away, thoughts. And even now I can see there's some part, I have thoughts of some dissatisfaction or unhappiness about some parts of my life. And I'm like, coming back to the present and, you know, and so I'm suppressing some needs, some desires. You know, I'm doing that now. I mean, I'm aware now, and so I'm see in some part of the day I'm doing that, but then some other part of the day I'm actually going in the third dimension to look at it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And when I was studying Hakomi, there were people there who came from Zen monasteries. They were experiencing awakening, blissful Buddha realms. And then they came to Hakomi, they realized that they were stuck and they had trauma and they were shaking on the cushion. And then they had enough insight or whatever guidance to, hey, I need to go now away from wilderness in Tasahara, you know, and process trauma. And so several people were like that. I was but many, they are not realizing that. And I felt like this is the highest teaching. Yeah, I think that's a pitfall, that we get the thing that this is the highest teaching, the direct path. Don't worry about the ego. Go straight for what you really are. This is not real. Go for that. Go for the ultimate. Who doesn't want to go for the ultimate?
Right.
And somehow, yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you said that, the higher teaching thing, or I'm done at first dimension, is the way I say it, like I'm done, because there's a truth to it. It's like, from what you can see, you know yourself as the ocean. It's a real realization. And so I think it can encourage people to believe that they've landed somehow and seen everything. It's especially the way that we contextualize it. We say this is the highest truth, right? And so it is a high truth, but if there's still stuff to be seen, I don't think that we should be saying that, because that's a showstopper. Just the sense I'm done. That's what I wanted to say about that. And something else. Well, it's not coming to me now. But the higher teaching thing, you talk about it a lot, but I don't say it that way. I talk about it as I'm done. that thing that I'm done I feel like it's still ego connected to that higher teaching principle, and then your direct experience seems to confirm it. So you have the teacher over here saying the highest truth is to see that you're the ocean, the waves are coming and going, none of them are you, or all of them are you, Sargadata, everything is you, whatever. But right there, because it feels so true, is where people, I think, are getting stuck. And here's where we should bring in this historical, I think, conversation. I posted the other day something from Ken Wilber's interview, which you sent to me, I think. Thank you for that. Where he talks, and I love that interview. I think everybody should watch it. It's Buddha at the Gas Pump, Ken Wilber.
I'll put it here if people want to watch it.
Yeah. He really lays it out. He's just good at that, laying things out in good context. He basically said that when these initial teachings, first dimension teachings really, were developed, Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, we had not yet discovered in a really explicit way the shadow and repression. Really, that's shadow repression and trauma work has happened basically in the last 150 years. But someone pointed out, well, the ancient Greeks talked about the mind-body connection, but they really didn't talk about it very explicitly. There was talk of it. They would say, like, asthma is anger. Well, that speaks to the mind-body connection and all that. But it really wasn't in any of those. And then because we believe in these higher teaching thing, we'll defend it. And so it's like, don't you dare say anything about Buddhism. Well, how are we going to develop if we don't question these, right? So historically speaking, really, the Buddhist teachings really didn't talk about shadows, not very explicitly and not very skillfully. And now Ken said we have some evidence. We've gone back and studied the monks over, as you know, decades to find out. Well, first of all, they found out their realization was true. The nirvana, or these states of consciousness, are really true. And they were missing the shadows and the repression. And in some cases, those things were staying there or getting worse over time. So now this is where we need to also step outside of just everything is awareness coming and going. We need to learn, like, what's happened in our history to see what we may have missed in our traditions. Even if we're saying the tradition is the highest teaching, we've discovered things after that, as he said so well, that we now need to incorporate. And trauma isn't even 150 years old. Our understanding of it's much, as you know, much more recent. So I think now in spirituality, we're looking back and saying, okay, do we want to continue to ignore this, right? There's definitely a price to pay if we do. And I think if people really identify with the core, pure, high teaching, they're going to be somewhat defensive around this. Because who wants to be told that your high teaching, your high realization isn't as deep as you thought it was? Nobody wants to really hear that, because it destroys the sense that you're attached to the teaching too. It's the ego thing. You can, but that's good, because the rug can get pulled out from under you. That's a good thing. And then
sense of safety, we get a sense of safety, and by believing that I found the ultimate teaching.
Right. I've had that before, thinking that I've got the highest teaching. So it's just a natural thing. But I just feel like now it's a really exciting time to be alive for me,
Yeah.
because you've got Ken Wilber over here saying all of this, which just makes total sense. You got the science confirming the repression and trauma thing behind the disease and chronic pain. We've had John Sarno and all these other folks. And now we have KI, which is really confirming a lot of it, the shadows, which really the shadows don't show up in second dimension either. You know, you can, well, they do, you have to prompt them up like shadow work, but that's all stuff that we're discovering. I feel like the second and third dimension is the stuff that was discovered after the ancient teachings were developed somewhat. And so yeah.
It's interesting because you mentioned about the Greeks being aware of the body-mind, body-mind organicity, they call it in Hakomi, because it's not even body-mind connection, but it's body-mind organicity. It's one. Yeah. But the Taoists, you know, there's a whole system of, oh, you have this meridian, the liver connected with anger and fear, and there's this, there is that, very much linking ailments with emotions and psychological stuff. There was like standard procedures thousands of years ago. And I can see that it's not so known, especially in the Neo-Advaita circles. But also they have been all throughout, like, you know, David Hawkins has a whole scale of consciousness from, like, you know, apathy, despondency, you know, hopelessness, going to fear, anger, pride, willingness. So these are all, and to reach to kind of love, unconditional love, and peace that passes understanding. You can't kind of like, how we call that, pole jumping. You can't do that. You need to go through all of those and somehow face each level. All of those levels is like, there are blocks that are holding us back, but we can't skip over them. We need to go through them. Somehow we need to have tools for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Ken will go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
We'll put this Ken Wilber interview here, but I really loved how he has this approach, three dimensions of work necessary, and usually time other traditions that we respect, they just touch on one, like the awakening. So waking up to the truth, to our true nature, waking up to awareness. But there is cleaning up, there's waking up, cleaning up, and growing up. And he explains there in depth how one way there are all these scandals, they say scandals with wise teachers, big scandals or small scandals, as well as we can add to these scandals like the wise great teachers who have, some of them, they don't have scandals, but they have weird chronic pains and conditions.
Right.
It seems that they're connected to not fully cleaning up in terms of trauma and deep unconscious stuff. They might be leftovers, like it was for you. You were experiencing bliss and joy and spaciousness at all times as a foundation of who you are, but somehow there was hidden stuff that you didn't see.
Yep. And I've been interested in that since then, of historically going back to teachers to find how many of them who weren't involved in scandals instead developed diseases or chronic pain, which they may or may not have been aware of. It may or may not have been connected to this. We probably know that it was to a certain degree, even if it was a physical injury, still the emotional, psychological stuff plays into physical injuries. But when you go back, you don't hear, there's a lack of transparency in some cases where people were sharing that, or you heard rumors of J. Krishnamurti being in pain, or you hear about Aja having Bell's palsy, but you don't hear them talking about it necessarily from an awareness standpoint of what was going on. And with Krishnamurti, apparently he died with the chronic pain. So to me, these are things that because we can't see this stuff until we get into second and third dimension, we can't see it directly. We sometimes have to see just the effects of it. We have to look and see, well, could this explain the scandals? It could, Because if that's a trauma or something unprocessed, then it makes sense that if a teacher crosses a line or sexually abuses or whatever, that could be obviously coming from the trauma. So you have to look at the effects. And I think that's one way we pull people into the work is they're not going to necessarily see it, right? In first and second dimension. So they might believe that it's not there.
Yeah.
But then if you look, there's the effects are everywhere. So you've got the scandals, you got the teachers who got sick and stayed sick or died. You have teachers who got depressed, suicidal, to the extent that they're talking about it. You have teachers who developed addiction after the awakening that doesn't get talked about, but it's there. And then you've got the chronic pain and the disease research. You see all the effects of it. And then if you look in your own life, you're seeing the effects of it in your relationship. You might not recognize it as such. So you might see that you, like you say, shut down, can't speak. I don't want to show sadness. And then you've got the teachings that contribute to that, because they might, some of them, not all of them, they might downplay that stuff, right? So sadness, okay, let it be, don't dig. Or anger, that's ego, that's not you. And so the teaching itself can force it. So there's a lot of ingredients coming in at once to create a soup of consciousness and blindness in this area, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first teacher, who was very influential for me, introduced me to this consciousness, awareness, presence of the fourth way tradition. And then later I realized I was in a cult, basically. And I realized later, 10 years later, 12 years later, that I wasn't enlightened. And then he had serious problems, and then he was dangerous to others. And now it's like, he's a cult leader and all that. But looking back, knowing about him is that I know that he was sexually molested as a child. And then also some abuse in the family. I know this from him directly. I know he didn't work on any of that. He went into this first dimension teaching, and he became heroically focused on it. And like being able to not identify with thoughts and feelings, so good that he will be vibrantly here and now, and seemingly loving and all of that. But then started to have, looking back now, started to get addicted to opioid pills because he had all kind of pains, and then he got into sexual addiction, and now sexually abusing a lot of people, just like he was, but calling it some divine plan. So I can see that the innocence the innocence of what happened, and the lack of the limitation of the teaching that he was following, and the limitation of whoever, it's good to have some supervisor or community that checks you, like, hey bro, you are not Jesus, relax. Right. Why don't you look at your shit?
And the other thing about that is, it makes me wonder the extent to which he was aware of the connection from his past and that behavior.
Not at all.
Right. But if there are teachers out there or people that are aware of the connection and they're processing it, the thing is can you let us know some about your process? Because if you don't, if you can put it on the table and just let us know that you're processing this, it's different than if you hide it from us. And so I think that also contributes to, because you're putting on one thing out here, that heroic presence, you say. But underneath there's a process going on that's not being shared. And that's a problem because you're teaching, right? So you're actually guiding people, whether you know it or not, away from their core stuff because you're not sharing it. And I realize that sharing that personal stuff doesn't sell very well. People think that. They'll think if I share that I had anger, repression, or shame, somehow people won't trust me. But at this day and age, I think people are looking for real more than anything else. They're not really looking for perfect saints. They're looking for someone who's in the trenches and is sharing their process, and because they can relate to that more, right? Than the perfect being who seems to have nothing wrong or going on. And that's also misleading people, I think. And the other thing, byproducts. We haven't talked about that. the byproducts of the first dimension stuff, you can, from that, what's so good about the first dimension is you can actually recognize the ocean as yourself, and then that you can go into the second dimensions and third dimensions from there. But one place where I think people get stuck is the byproducts. When I had that awakening, there was just like this overwhelming sense of love, like, and it felt so good. And the peace, the byproduct, the peace and joy for a while, until I noticed that was repressed. The byproducts were like the new drug for me. And I think they helped to drown out the pain at first dimension. And I've seen people get stuck there. And I think if we become addicted to the byproducts, that's actually pointing us to something, because the byproducts happen. But if we're really clinging to them, then what's that about? Like, that isn't that just like the heroin? We're trying to keep something here that feels good. And then I notice that people will come back to practices which bring about the bliss. Yeah. They get really hung up on that. But right under the bliss, I found it is like, there's mom and dad pain right there. So you can see how the bliss and the byproducts can also be a stopper at that. First to mention that real quick, Adya was a good teacher for me, because he said, don't get fixated on the byproducts. And he didn't pan it out more. And now we're panning it out. Like, because when you become fixated with the byproducts, you may just be covering things up, and then you just sort of like go asleep in that. He didn't say it that way, but it was good to hear that back then, that like, yeah, you might feel blissful and peaceful. That's not it. That's just bliss and peace, a byproduct of it. That helped me not get too stuck in it, so that I just didn't stay addicted to the bliss. And then I guess something else could open up and I could go into the pain. And that wasn't, then strangely, then going into the pain, there's more bliss and joy. Right. Yeah. But be careful with that too. But that's the thing that people should know. Second and third dimension can bring out even more byproducts, like a feeling of well-being at a deep level. When you really get to the root programming, it might not come for a while, because you're working with repression, which is painful or trauma. But if you stay with it, it's just like anything else in the other dimensions. As you see things coming to the surface and they transmute, something else happens in your experience. You can access those byproducts or deepen into that realization, of what you recognize as yourself as the ocean. It's hard to talk about all this, but all that to me plays into it, even the byproducts. Yeah, and they do speak in these teachings of these dangers of like the phenomenal logical aspect of awakening, the byproducts, some pleasure, some sensations of the spine, some like can be for some people majestic with bells and whistles and angels, but even the regular teachings, they warn us that, hey, don't let this come, let this go. What comes and goes is not you. That's just enjoy it, but don't. I had another thought here. Yeah, it seems like the first dimension teaching. I don't know. I was talking to someone the other day. It's like surfing. I'm surfing the ocean. I'm surfing, and so I'm getting very good at not getting wet, and kind of surfing and staying at this wakefulness, and but actually for the deeper freedom, I need to be actually scuba diving. Yeah, soaked in it. Yeah, it's a good metaphor. Yeah, and I can, I still like first dimension practices, because there's some, there's a soothing element of it. Sometimes I wake up as some little note, but I drop in, and that is integrating or something that's diminishing. And also there is like a presence radiating. I don't know. I'm going back to base. Yeah, it's good, but I'm more now. I do this for some time. I notice something in the belly, then I switch. Okay, I switch setting into now. All right, let's go in. Okay, I'm afraid, and bringing it up and doing all kind of skillful, very. It's like, okay, throwing the surfboard and now putting the scuba gear, going in, and after doing this for some time,
it feels like, okay, go back on the surfboard. So I'm starting to be versatile,
Yeah.
switching, going into these things. And I think that's what, like a more versatile practice.
Yeah.
Not rigid, not dogmatic,
Yeah.
whatever is needed.
Yeah. And the first dimension gets subsumed into our second dimension. Second dimension is subsumed into third dimension. And in other words, you have all that at your disposal. You're not so, but dimension, you don't have second and third there.
Yeah.
So I would just ask people, wouldn't you want to have that depth there so you can be flexible and move into the deeper programming? Because you can always come back to the ocean. It's the basis of everything. So so even the people who might do second dimension practice, but don't spend enough time in first dimension, this is the value of it. First dimension is to stabilize that ocean. Some people are not doing that and they're going to the second dimension work, and that can be destabilizing because they don't have that oceanic kind of recognition to come back to. But when you have that and you make that a part of your practice, the first dimension on the ocean, the waves are coming and going, you take that, so to speak, into that third dimension. You're flexibly able to go into second or dimension without losing a sense that you're still just this open awareness the whole time. That's more skillful than just being stuck whatever arises and thinking that you've seen everything and you don't even know how to go. That's the other thing. You might not even know how to go. And so there's all that stuff that you can't see, right? Because of that.
Yeah, I do with the circles I'm doing, I really almost each time spend some time with witnessing presence, pointing to awareness, and then going to the second or third dimension. But each time doing the first dimension too, because otherwise, at least the people that are coming to me, it's a danger that we are now just doing mind processing without not awareness-based processing, but more like ego processing, which can still be useful, but that's going to be limitation there. I know you have done the first dimension for so long, and you feel you have a big contribution for going at the depths, and you know that there are teachers who are doing a good job with awareness recognition, so you let them do that. Although you are starting to do this more, you are focusing with repression, trauma, stuff like that.
Yeah. So what I'll say is if I'm not focusing in first dimension, there's plenty of teachings out there that are very skillful.
Yeah.
And we also talk about it here. But yeah, I'm more interested in helping people go where they haven't been able to go and they can't go with those first dimension teachings. Yeah. And I also feel like I put out 10 years of material for first dimension. I've done that and it's all out there. And there's also all these other teachings. So now we can focus on, because I really feel like the third dimension is new. It's certainly new to KI. And in some ways, it might be just new to spiritual practice for people. So I want to spend my time there because since it's new for people, because there's skill, that has to evolve from it, and pitfall, resistance. There's enough to work with just that. But in no way am I saying forget first and second dimension. Because for me, I don't even know how you can go skillfully into that third dimension without that first dimension awareness there. That seeing. And then at the second dimension with KI, you have to learn the tools that take you into the third dimension. So it's all included in a way. It's like transcend and include, like Ken says. It's like, okay, first dimension, that's my experience. Include that. Now go deeper, right? Second dimension, include that. Okay, I can reach some layers of the unconscious. Transcend that, go to the third dimension. So just another way of saying it. Don't exclude it. I'm not saying forget about awareness. I'm saying that and that and that.
And I felt like I had this strong impulse to research and hunt and seek the ultimate teachings for like 30 years now. And so I'm pretty versatile with many teachings and systems. And they are very few, almost not at all, as to going to the very depths and offering some methodology how to process there. So it's very rare. There are some teachings where they speak about it. You can see that they are aware that what's there, but they don't offer you practical tools as how to dig there, how to clean up there. So, and I'm aware that in the third dimension we didn't talk about what to do now. Yeah,
Right.
because yeah, it's a whole other ball game there, which may involve certain kind of set of skills of repetition, almost like repetitiously bringing certain commands to awareness and doing almost like somebody from the outside would say, well, this is just mind. I can see one of my teachers saying, well, this is just mind. That, I become aware of this. I don't know, I don't trust love. I was doing some work at the third dimension, trading some session with a great facilitator the other day, and something me would say, don't trust love, don't trust love, don't trust my love, I don't trust love, get away from me. Okay, you can't just witness this one time. So we needed to do a bunch of repetitively bringing this and going back into it, bringing in this, more feelings will come. I'll cry, I allow crying, go back to it. So yeah, for that, we can't just throw this like this in the internet. First of all, it might be dysregulating. Second of all, it's precious, secret, esoteric. I mean, it's not secret, but in the past, there's this, they wouldn't throw the deepest teaching like that. And so we are not trying to be secret and esoteric, but it's too much skill there, specialized skill. But if you are interested in that, from my point of view, that's where the deepest freedom, after going there at the depths and facing this yucky, murky thing, they diminish. Then I have more spontaneous joy and enjoyment of life for no reason, because I have less of these blocks and the subconscious negative thoughts and feelings I'm subconsciously holding. I remove this more and more, and I can see Lester is totally right. But for that, so I guess the best place I know is to come to Killer Bee members area, which is like an online platform where there are hundreds of people interested of doing this awareness-based somatic processing, with lots of resources and live meetings, experiential with Scott and myself and other great facilitators. And so, which is also the cheapest that it's like $30 per month or something like that. And the first 2 weeks are for free. I'm not saying this to plug in some advertisement. I'm just, people are interested. It's available.
Yeah, it is, and it's great. I mean, I am plugging it because I think that it helps people.
Yeah.
But not for money. If I was going to make money, I would have made it higher. It's more for like we're talking about a conversation that not everybody's happening, but people want to have the conversation, do the work.
Yeah.
Where do you do that? If there's an advanced skill involved, it's not so easy to go on YouTube with advanced skill on a third dimension work where it could upset people's nervous system. They don't have the skill. So big part of the reason for the members area is that there's skill involved and we have to show it to you. Because if you don't have it, you might not even be able to reach these deeper things without the skill. And also without the skill, you might just dysregulate yourself, or something could happen. You don't know how to deal with it. So there's much more than money involved in this or marketing. This is really like, we're being conscientious, I think. It's like creating a community where we can really do this. So yeah, plugging it is a funny thing. I'll even say this, even to the extent we explain that third dimension work, I would say to people, be careful, because you might hear it and not have the skill. And so you might just sit there and repeat things or whatever, and then you just work your system up. So I even want to put a little disclaimer on that, because this is a different dimension of practice. It's not just be with what is. It's not just simple inquiry or Ramana's inquiry. It's going to bring up stuff. That's where the deeper freedom is, but it's going to bring up stuff that might be a lot. And so we have ways of dealing with that when it comes up, right? We want to show people that. We don't want to just, I don't want to not be conscientious and just put it out there for everybody, because I don't know if that's the right way to do that on this stuff, you know? Anyway, so yeah, killaby.com for people who want to join or just listen to what we have to say. There's the button right there. You go to killaby.com.
Yeah, and I will put this link here underneath. And you know, like great non-dual teachers that I respect, they are speaking that whatever unpleasantness comes, fear, sadness, the way to go is walk through it, not around it, not go the other way, walk through it no matter what. Yeah, it's just that for most people, those unpleasant things don't come up because we have defended ourselves so well. So they don't even come up, but they drive our life from the shadows. So this method that we have is not just more mind. I mean, there's some aspect of the mind that will help us to face our most painful things that hold us back. That's what I'm looking at it like that.
Yeah, that whole thing that it's all mind. So I talked to Ken Wilber years ago. We sat down for 2 hours and talked. And I said, what is this whole thing where teachers say it's all mind? It's all concepts. He said, well, it is, but you'd have to go around with a eraser head on everything that you say. If a teacher pointed something, they would have to erase it right after to make sure you understood the message. But even if it's higher mind, so you'd have to go around with a eraser head all the time. At first dimension, that's helpful just to see concept. But if you keep dismissing the concepts completely, some of the concepts leading you down into the deeper dimensions, like, you know, the deeper dimension, we don't say in second, third dimension, it's all mind. You know, we don't say that.
Yeah.
Because that's something at first dimension that the teachers are pointing to help people not identify with their mind and not, you know, but this is a different dimension is all I have to say. That doesn't work at that level to say it's all mind. In fact, that just pulls you back to the first dimension. It can pull you back to the body. And so that's it. And
even in these teachings, the non-dual Vedantic, they speak about this, that need to put all of this stuff, like all the sense of separation, lack, or whatever, all the suffering, you need to put into the fire, be seen by awareness, put in the fire, and you need a stick to put these things in a fire. And then you put all the things in the fire with the stick, the logs with the stick, which is, or use a thorn to remove a thorn. You know, the wind, I don't know how is it, the wind brought the clouds in. The wind will dispel the clouds. So yeah, needing to skillfully use some tool, technique from awareness, by awareness. Yeah, I think Buddha said something like, we must, the self will wake itself up by itself. Anyway, well, all right, I think that we covered quite a lot of territory, and it would be nice to have another meeting. Maybe 2 good topics would be, I mean, to go deeper into this repression and trauma commands, trauma response at some point, because this is so important and so unknown in an experiential way in psychotherapy.
Yeah. Maybe
another topic would be, you know, teacher shadows. It's important. Teacher shadows.
Yeah. The last thing I would say is, for those listening who might say, I don't know what you're talking about in second, third dimension. If you can actually see it's just a skill issue, a lot of it, if there's resistance there, but there's a skill issue, you're not expected to know that at first dimension, because the skills being given to you are not those second, third dimension skills. So as you're sitting there with a certain skill set, you're only going to have a certain realization. This is something that Stephen Katz said. I think it was Stephen Katz and Greg Good used to tell me all the time, is that the modality will actually create a different realization. Like the tools that you use bring you into a different depth of realization. So whatever tools you have at first dimension, you can't expect to have that deeper embodiment if the tools aren't there to reach it. And it's not your fault. It's just that where you've been hanging out, people you've been hanging out with, teachers or whatever, they just didn't have that skill. It's not really their fault. That's just not their teaching. But at a certain point, if you realize there's something deeper, you might have to reach out beyond that teaching, that Buddhism or whatever, and gain the skill. And it's always the skill that shows it to you. Like once you have the skill, you can see those second and third dimension creatures with skill. So I think that might help people who might hear this and say, might be defensive around it, thinking, but if you understand its skill, it's just like anything. Do you know how to fix a broken faucet? If you don't, you're going to have to learn the skills to get the tools to do that. You simply don't know how to do it. It's just that simple. It's so different with these spiritual technologies. You don't have the skill or the tools. You can't expect to be able to fix the faucet of your unconscious the same way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mihai.
All right. Thank you. Ciao, ciao, everybody.